order to appoint those people in the portfolios that they are best suited in to do so.
A fire which broke out at George Mukhari Academic Hospital in Karangua, north of Pretoria, has claimed the life of a 35-year-old patient last night. It's reported the female patient was admitted to the psychiatric unit last week. Several other patients were moved to a different wing of the hospital for safety, and the fire was extinguished. Gauteng's health spokesperson, Mohlahlana Mudiba, explains.
The cause of the fire is not yet known at this stage. The incident has been reported to the South African Police Services for further investigation. The Gauteng Department of Health wishes to extend our deepest condolences to the patient's family as they mourn the sudden passing of their daughter. Both the bereaved family and the families of the 17 patients will be taken through a debriefing, and counseling services will also be made available.
In other news, 3 police officers have appeared in the Seshego Magistrate Court outside Polokwane, Limpopo for alleged corruption. Police spokesperson Malesela Ledwaba says the officers allegedly confiscated Nyaupe drugs from a homestead at Gachokwe and demanded a bribe from the suspected dealer in August 3 years ago. Ledwaba says the officers are also accused of instructing the complainant to pay admission of guilt fines.
Subsequently, the complainant decided to open a case against the implicated police officials, leading to the transfer of the case to Anti-Corruption and Organized Crime Investigation Unit. Following the investigations, the 3 police officials were directly implicated in the incident and subsequently arrested.
And lastly, the City of Cape Town's Water and Sanitation Department says they've worked through the night and made progress with the maintenance work on water infrastructure on the Cape Flats. The city has shut down water supplies in various areas yesterday to work on the water networks. The water is expected to be turned back on tomorrow. MMC for Water and Sanitation, Zaid Batruddin, says water tankers have been made available.
The first day of our water shutdown went extremely well. We had 5 teams at 5 different locations removing and replacing critical valves which we find along the Cape Flats network. Additionally, at our tanker locations, there was order, lines were short and
Recapping the top story for this hour, DA leader Solim Simanga says political parties must consider that none of them obtained majority votes to form a political government. On Sunday, Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi postponed an announcement for his provincial cabinet. That's it from me. For SFM News, I'm Eva Chipa.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide, leading the conversation. Are you blowing your paycheck on car insurance every month? Monica, 39 from 3 Rivers, pays just 1,515 Rand a month for a 2018 BMW 320i.
None of the insurance companies has come near to the price I'm paying. I am happy at insurance. I'm going nowhere.
SMS out to 30754 now for a quick quote that could save you hundreds every month. You'll also find out about included benefits like panic assistance and help it out 24-hour roadside assistance. Yusuf, 45 from Tegadal, pays just 700 Rand a month for his 2021 VW Polo.
Help it out. Took the family up to go and see the snow and I got stuck. The service was quick, even though it was in a very remote area. Absolutely phenomenal service from our insurance.
SMS out to 30754 now. That's out to 30754. Outsurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's, C's and limits apply. Premiums are risk profile dependent and reviewed annually. Client comments do not constitute financial advice.
Say ROBOT_BOII robot. The Cash Moon SABC 1, 6 p.m. on Saturdays. Deal or no deal, celebrity game. Let's get it.
Durban is open for business and investment. A large delegation from the United States of America, including captains of industry, business, investors, finances, decision makers, and high-profile leaders will attend the 2024 Resurgence Durban Conference to explore and maximize investment opportunities in Durban. Be part of the Resurgence Durban Conference taking place at the Durban ICC from the 17th to the 21st of July 2024. Durban is forging ahead with its plan of action that is aimed at boosting trade and investments within South Africa, the African continent, and the rest of the world. Businesses must register now to exhibit at the conference. Closing date is the 30th of June 2024. To register for the Resurgence Durban Conference and for more information, visit www.resurgenceconference.org.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
You're listening to the second hour of the Talking Point, 10 after 10. Welcome to the show. Of course, it's a Tuesday, so coming up in this hour, we'll be talking finance with Brian Hirsch. Before we get to that, lots of your WhatsApp voice notes, text messages from the open line. We'll just take a couple of voice notes and then get into the rest of the programming for the hour.
Let's have the conversation. WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107.
Hey, Cathy, morning. You know, this issue of churches. You know, if you are a pastor, Cathy, and then let's say you belong to party A, and then you are going to vote as a pastor. Which party are you going to vote? Because you've got congregation that support party A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I think the best way, Cathy, the pastors must play far from politics. Pastors are not supposed to be voting. Pastors are not supposed to be campaigning for political parties. Otherwise, you can't mix religion with politics. That is a clear conflict there, Cathy. You understand? How do you pray for peace? How do you pray for peace when you belong to another political party and another members of your congregation belong to a certain thing, believe in certain things? Cathy, life is tough.
Hi, Sister Cathy. I think the reason why you see these smaller parties now join GNU, your UDM, PAC, and Rising Zans, I think ANC, they promised them some department that their leaders will be ministers there, so that they can have this 50+1 with those smaller parties, so that they can kick out the DA. I think so. That is my opinion. My first time in the show, I'm Sqenqa Shibase from KwaXhakaza in KZN.
Morning, Cathy. You're speaking with Stembiso from Mpumalanga. Cathy, we are now currently at the GMU that need to take place, and all thanks to Umkhonto weSizwe. Umkhonto weSizwe is the game changer. If it wasn't for Umkhonto weSizwe or the birth of Umkhonto weSizwe, we wouldn't be where we are now. The ANC might have been maybe leading this country alone. So some people, I hear them criticizing Umkhonto weSizwe, forgetting that they played a huge role in the state that we are at now. And watch the space, during the local government election, they're gonna take over. And I wonder what the people that are opposing Umkhonto weSizwe are going to say. Thanks, Cathy. Stembiso from Mpumalanga.
Hi, Cathy. Good morning. What a deep introduction you just came in with. This thing of gatekeepers, it's everywhere in the workplace. It is where it's incorporated these days, private sector. You know, there's this process that they changed recently. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, from HR, Cathy, that if you want to apply for a position, internal post, any position internally, you won't be recommended as long as you haven't spoken to your manager. So your manager need to sign that you can apply for that post. Meaning, if you are not in good terms with your manager, maybe you want to move from this department to another department, it will never happen because that guy is your gatekeeper. So yeah, it's happening and it's painful. Buena.
SAFM values your views. Be an active citizen.
If you have a life insurance but you are smoking weed only, do they consider you as a smoker or a non-smoker?
He wants to know that if you smoke weed, marijuana.
But I can tell you, if you tell the insurance company, I don't smoke, but I smoke weed and marijuana, I think they may either load you or decline you.
I don't know why, man. Yeah, cause I'm high, cause I'm high, cause I'm high. Are you really high though, man? He really is high, man. Shoop, shoop, shooby-doo-wah. Get jiggy with it. Skippity-bee-bop.
Talking Finance with Brian Hirsch, making sense of your finance.
I know that is Brian Hirsch's favorite promo. It is one thing to get a backtrack like that for a finance guy, hey?
Yeah, and you know, as we come closer to the end of the program, have you noticed I talk a lot quicker so that we can get a lot more in? My wife always says to me, slow down, slow down.
Yeah.
I used to have stickers on the wall here.
That said slow down.
That said slow down as you come to the end of the program, exactly on TV, because you want to try and get as much in as possible. That one, talking about, you know, smoking and whether you smoke weed or not, whether the insurance companies will load you or decline you. They'll definitely decline you. Although today, globally, apparently David Shapiro arrived back from New York and he spent some time there a few weeks ago and he said that everywhere you go you can smell weed. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
The whole of New York smells of weed.
Yeah, it's because of how it has been mainstreamed, right, and commercialized in such a big way. We could not be far off from that as well, Brian. That might be Johannesburg next, so don't be quick to judge New York. Always a pleasure having you in studio, Brian Hirsch.
Thank you very much.
So today it is, I think I got my wires crossed. We are going to have a full hour conversation about trust, but that's happening next week. Why do I sound like I'm off mic? Please just double check what's happening with the sound there. So we are going to have that conversation next week. Today we're just going to touch on trust, and because it's the last Tuesday of the month, get into the questions that you've received from our listeners.
Yes, what I do with the questions is I get callers every day, and then I batch those callers, which are the ones that come more frequently. I do get question trust on a more frequent basis, but a lot of the questions today, I mean, the one particular question, all I'm hearing now is people wanting to retire. They want to retire before the two-pot system comes in because they think they're going to be prejudiced. And the question which we'll deal with is, what's the impact of early retirement? But let me just touch on trusts for a moment. Let's understand there are two types of trust. The first trust is what's called an inter vivos trust. And this is a trust that you form during your lifetime and you transfer assets from your own name into this trust. There is protections. There is protections against creditors. If something goes wrong and you've got a business and your business is in debt and you've got money in assets, as long as you haven't been deceitful and in any way try to hide assets, you can be protected. Secondly, you may want to protect your family in the event of death against squandering money, or, in many cases people are worried about a younger woman inheriting money, getting remarried, and the person who remarries that individual is after the money. And then you've got younger children that under the age of 18 can't inherit. So that is called a testamentary trust. But not every situation requires a trust, and a lot of questions that I do get is, should I have a trust? And I see lots of people who've got trusts, but they've got no assets in. They've been convinced to form a trust. The lawyers there's fees that have been paid, but they've never put anything into a trust. And when they ask me, should they put anything in trust? I say no. There's no purpose of putting it. So that's what we're going to deal with in detail next week. And then the following 3 weeks, if you recall, we spoke about financial planning and we dealt with estate last week. The week before last week, we didn't have a program. We dealt with estate and life insurance and disability. We're then going to deal with retirement. We're going to deal with tax planning, and we're going to do with ultimately investment planning. And that makes up your financial plan.
There's such a big focus on retirement, Brian, and as you rightfully say, retiring early. Do you think it's just seasonal, or is it the fact that the two-pot system is about to kick in? And when we talk about people taking an early retirement, I mean, do we have an age, a particular age group that is specifically looking to do this?
Look, I think, the goal of people working is to one day stop working. And the idea of stopping working earlier is just lovely. Now, under retirement funds, you cannot retire from those funds before the age of 55. And at age 55, there are certain benefits that kick in when you retire before age 55. If you want to withdraw funds from a pension or provident fund, you can, but you'll pay tax on the withdrawal table, which is very onerous. You can't draw from a retirement annuity before age 55, subject to maybe if there's disability or you've emigrated from South Africa. But other than that, no, I don't think it's because of the two-pot system. All the two-pot system is as scared individuals to say there's going to be changes happening in the retirement space, and therefore maybe I should retire earlier. It's nonsense. You shouldn't be retiring earlier. Everyone's benefits up to the 31st of October, and we will deal with the two-pot system as we get closer, is protected, it's vested, you'll be able to draw the funds from that when you retire, so that's not the reason. No, I think people just like the idea of retiring earlier, and one needs to understand, when you do your numbers, retirement inflation is a lot higher than during your working life. If you think of people who've got debt and you think of people who've got children at school, the increases in retirement is less in terms of inflation than when you reach retirement, because at retirement you're left with three components. You're left with, firstly, you're left with food. Secondly, you're involved with healthcare. And then all the other things, and transport. So all those things, the inflation is not 5 or 6%, could be closer to 8%.
All right, we're going to continue this conversation with Brian in a moment.
Set in a gleaming new high-tech trauma center that deals with only the most serious cases, an emergency medical team must battle through the crucial first hour of care to save lives that hang in the balance. Each distinctive case is told with a thrilling intensity and nail-biting urgency as the team work on the very edge of the medically possible. This is a medical drama like no other. This is Critical. Mondays to Wednesdays at 9 p.m. on S3. Starts 11 June. Channel your best drama with BBC Primetime. Only on S3. Open up.
SAFM Youth Month Takeover. SAFM invites young people between the ages of 18 to 35 to take over the airwaves this Youth Month. All you have to do is send a WhatsApp voice note or text message to 061 410 4107 or email info@safm.co.za. Tell us which show you'd like to co-host and what the two compelling issues facing our 30 years of democracy are, and we could be calling you. Terms and conditions apply. Talking Finance with Brian Hirsch, making sense of your finance.
Shop till you drop once you get the best insurance premium. Just like that, 53-year-old Candice, who pays only 766 Rand per month on her grey 2022 Suzuki Vitara Brezza GL with Outsurance. With cheaper premiums, she can afford to go shopping. SMS out to 30754 for an Outsurance quote. That's out to 30754. Outsurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
#SAFM Talking Point.
We continue the conversation with Brian Hirsch. So we've started with the question on the impact of retiring early. We're not done with it.
No,
okay?
because I mentioned the inflation. The problem is when you retire earlier, you've saved for a shorter period of time, and you still probably could live that much longer. So if you think of someone starting to save for retirement at age 30 and retiring at 60, they've saved for 30 years, and let's assume they live another 30 years. They've got 30 further years that money has to last them. If you now stop work at 55, you have now only saved for 25 years, and you've now got 35 years ahead of you. So your pot is that much smaller, and the need is going to be that much longer. So really, early retirement, you've got to do your homework so carefully. You may want to retire earlier, and it's amazing. I've had 2 callers in the last week. One of them worked for a company has been working for 44 years for the same company. Congratulations to that individual, because not many people still do that.
Especially in this day and age. Are there people that stay in one organization?
And the other one's been there for 33 years. Was absolutely amazing. But so, again, do your numbers, understand, and then maybe you've got to think very carefully. If you're going to retire because you're tired of the job you've been doing, you want to do something else, try and find something else to help you add income to the pot you've already got. So even though you may be retiring early from the job, find what else you can do. Have a look at it and do that homework before you actually resign, because there aren't that many jobs out there, particularly for older people. And I can never understand that, because I always say give older people a job for 2 reasons. One, you don't have to give them a future. Young people come into business, they want a future. They want to know where they're going. And you don't have to give an older person a future. And secondly, you'll get them for a lot less than what you will for a younger person, because they've got options. It's not all about the money. It's also about what they want to do and keeping busy so that brains don't atrophy and things like that.
Sure. Does it actually have any kind of impact, Brian? And I guess I'm speaking here from the perspective of if you move around jobs a lot, then you sort of have to preserve your funds there, all of these periods of waiting for transitions. Does it affect in the long run what you're going to be able to access at retirement?
Enormously, because the amount of money you're saving. A 25-year-old who works for 5 years and puts that money into a preservation fund, in other words, doesn't take that money and then receives that money and all the growth at age 60, compared to someone who starts at 30, putting the money away, so they've lost 5 years of capital because they're only starting, is enormous in terms of what we call the 8th wonder of the world, compound interest. Do the numbers. You'll be absolutely amazed the difference. Investing for 30 years, I've used this example before, 200 Rand a month, increasing by 8% every year, so 200 Rand this year for 12 months will go to 216 and getting a 10% return. The difference between a 30-year and a 25-year investment is half. So the person who's invested for 30 years will only have put in 14,000 Rand less, and they'll get 1.8 million, and someone who starts 5 years later will only get just on 1 million. It's amazing what that compound effect makes.
All right. Let's then move on to issues of a will. I always wonder why it is that when it comes to a will, we almost need to be convinced to have one. People don't seem to fully understand the weight and the importance of a will, and myself included, right?
Well, Cathy, I'm only going to make 2 points about wills today because I'm going to deal next week with wills. If you don't have a will, then the assets you may have, whatever you may have, whether it just be a car, whether it may be an insurance policy or something that you haven't appointed a beneficiary, who is that asset going to go to? And then if you don't have a will and you've got assets above 250,000 Rand, you have to get letters of executorship from the master. And if you don't have a will, you've then got the master's got to determine who's going to be the executor. And that can take months to wind up. And then what happens to the money you've got? What happens if a husband and wife don't have a will? And even though they're going to inherit from each other, but nothing can be done until the master has given that letter of executorship. So if you don't have a will, the two main components that are problematical is one, who the asset's going to go to, and if you want those assets to go to someone, not necessarily a husband or wife, a child or something like that, maybe a brother or sister, maybe a parent, you need a will, and then to get that estate wound up quickly. And if you've got children, what happens to the young children while all this is happening? You can have a one-page will. Doesn't have to be a sophisticated will. It can be a one-page will just dealing. You can go and buy it from the various news agencies. They've got it. You can download it. But and by the way, I've said this before. We're not alone. 80% of the people in the world don't have wills.
Yeah, and it always strikes me why we procrastinate getting a will when we know just how much chaos it tends to cause when people die, and when they die suddenly especially. Yeah.
We should have a program one day and ask people to phone in.
And tell us why they don't have wills.
Tell us where they've lost a partner,
Yeah.
whether it be husband or spouse, and where they didn't have a will and what problems they've had.
Sure. Okay. All right. We'll do that. You touched a little bit on this already, Brian, and it's around the cornerstones of a financial plan. And of course, we've outlined how
we're going to do that over the next 4 weeks. Next week is trusts, and then the following 3 weeks will be tax, investment, and retirement planning, each one subject being dealt with on each week.
All right. And this one is a question around people who are looking to park money for shorter periods of time with the highest possible outcome in terms of interest, or with the highest yield in terms of interest. Brian, I'm looking at the time. It's 10:30. We'll get into that question in a moment. Time for your latest news headlines.
Thank you very much, Cathy, and a very good morning. With the news headlines, Kemudupi Makhalemele. The EFF says it'll occupy its opposition benches and continue to mobilize the Progressive Caucus in Parliament. Gauteng DA leader Solim Simanga says political parties must consider that none of them obtained majority votes to form a provincial government. And WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been freed on bail from a British prison after reaching a plea deal that ends his fight against extradition to the US. A full news update coming up at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 18 rand 11 to the dollar, 22 rand 99 to the pound, and 19 rand 43 to the euro. Markets in Asia were mainly weaker at the closing bell. The JSE is weaker in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe have extended losses. Gold is trading at $2,325. Platinum $1,001 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $85.91 a barrel.
Talking Finance with Brian Hirsch, making sense of your finance.
All right, Brian Hirsch in the hot seat, as he is every Tuesday. It is the last Tuesday of the month, so this week we're dealing with some of the FAQs, the frequently asked questions throughout the month. I'll be taking your calls on 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial in order to ask your own set of questions to Brian. 086 000 2032. On the WhatsApp voice note line, you can send through those voice notes and questions on 0614 104 107. So shorter term investments, Brian, those that are looking to park money, what can they do? What options are available?
Okay, well, let's put it that way. There's no short-term investments. There's short-term savings. The word investment is inherently attached to growth, and growth assets take time. So if you've got looking to park money for the next 1 to 3 years, you've got to be looking at money market funds. You're not going to take on any risk. You're going to earn interest. Interest is taxable. Remember that it's all fair enough, because I always talk about government bonds. I've talked about a 2-year government bond, which is paying 9.5%, a 3-year government bond paying 10%, and a 5-year government bond paying 11.5%. That's gross interest, not net. You always need to calculate what is your taxable income and how will that affect the return. But you've got to stay in money markets. You want certainty and you want security. So understand there are lots of, when you talk to insurance companies and you buy insurance products, the minimum period they have is 5 years. You can only go, because the difference between a bank and an insurance company, insurance companies can take 5-year money, banks can take daily money. So you've got to stick to the banking. There are income funds. You find out in any investment you're going into, is there any risk to your capital? Because risk needs time as well, because you need to iron out volatility. So there are lots of components to the bank's money market funds. I must say to you, I still favor 5-year government retail bonds if you're not paying tax. and you can get your income monthly, because if you're not paying tax, 11.5% is an incredibly good rate. I know it's so many of our callers have phoned me. They are so frustrated because they can't get on when they try and get onto the sites. I promote. I'm not employed by the government to promote their government retail bond, and I promote it, but it's so difficult to buy them. But it shouldn't be online. You've got to persevere. An 11.5% return, bearing in mind interest rates over the next 12 to 18 months, even sooner, are going to come down. So if you're getting 8.5 or 9% now from your bank, I can tell you that in the next 12 months, that 9% will be down to 7%. Whereas in the government retail bond, you're locking in 2 years, 9.5, 3 years, 10, and 5 years, 11.5. And remember, that rate changes on the 1st of every month. It's based on what are current rates. So on the 1st of July, that rate will change again.
I'm interested in what you said, Brian, about the fact that with short-term investing, it should be stable. So it's not a high-risk game. But often when it comes to short-term investing, I'm investing today because I want to see, what's the quickest way I can make this money grow? And sometimes they say invest in technology stocks, invest in upcoming startup companies, and you're going to make lots of money.
Well, startup companies, for example, don't make money overnight. Startup companies take time to build the business. So that's certainly a no-no if you talk about venture capital or private equity. When you talk about markets, I'll give you an example. The big talk at the moment, everyone's talking about a stock called NVIDIA, which is an American stock. It's a chip company. It's a wonderful company. As a matter of fact, last week it became the largest cap company in the world. It overtook Apple and Microsoft. Sure. In the last 3 days, it's now back to below third, because it's come back 10% even more in the last 3 days. So that's what I'm saying. Maybe it will, as earnings come through, it will perform again. It's a great company, but in the short term, if you'd put money in last week, you've already lost 10 to 12%. And that's what happens with markets. Technology is long-term great investing, but in the short term. So why would you, if you're telling me I've got money, people phone me and say, where can I put 100,000 for the next 12 months? You can't put it into the market. You can't put it into growth assets, because growth assets come with volatility. And if you want to achieve growth, you've got to understand risk. And risk is both up and down. So long-term, yes, you can do well. That's why I'm saying anything from 0 to 3. Just be careful, just be cautious, money market. And if you're a pensioner and you're not paying tax, seriously, I've said this so many times, go and look at government retail bonds. Where, as you as a pensioner, can you earn 11.5% for the next 5 years? And if you're not paying tax, after tax, you can't. Don't even try.
You see, Brian, is this why, as people, so many of us end up investing in pyramid schemes?
Yes, because it's too good to be true. It sounds so good. Get rich quick. If you think about Bitcoin, Bitcoin went to 70,000. It came all the way back to 15. Those who bought in the later stages have now done exceptionally well, but it's still at those levels where people were buying at top prices. They still haven't got back their money, and that's now 3 years later. So what I'm saying is, you can't be investing short term. You can be saving short term for events. If you need to think about, and sometimes people have got the wrong strategy. And I often talk to people, someone phoned me yesterday and says he's in the bank, he's earning 8.3%. I worked out after his tax rate, he's getting 4.9%, and he wants the next 2 to 3 years. And I said, why the next 2 to 3 years? He doesn't really know why the next 2 to 3 years. He can't think further. This is a man in his early 50s. So I'm saying, if you need to understand, why are you saying I need to be invested for the next 2 to 3 years? Do you have an objective? What is the objective that you need that
to get
money?
As much money as possible is the objective.
No, that's not a strategy to get as much money as possible. You want security because you need to know I'm buying a home or a car, or I've got education costs, or all different things. But if I'm thinking long term, my mother used to think in 6 months terms. She used to phone me from the bank every 6 months. What must I do about reinvesting? She did that for 20 years. You know how much it costs you in terms of purchasing power. But that's how people think.
Yeah.
And even if you're 75 or 80, if your children are going to inherit one day and you are looking to invest, don't worry about the fact that you may not be alive in 1 or 2 years' time. Look to the long term, because you may not need short term. If you need income, you want certainty. If you're looking for growth, then have a much longer term time horizon.
Okay. All right. I think that's good advice, right? And any good financial advice is quite sobering. So you're making us all think a little bit more deeply, Brian, about why we make certain investment choices.
Cathy,
apparently the fact that we want more money is not good enough.
Cathy, let me say this to you.
Yes.
A good general will take you where you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
A great general will take you where you ought to be. And that's why you need to have a conversation with a financial planner to understand what is this fanaticism about short term. What does that mean? Is it really short term, or you're just thinking, I can't think longer than 6 months or 12 months, 18 months?
Mm-hmm. It probably also has to do with how long people are willing to sacrifice, right? Because they're thinking, maybe if I can deny myself this particular portion of money for the next 12 months, I'll get to eat it with extras.
Cathy, I'll ask you one question. Has the last 5 years flown?
Yes.
I mean, don't we all say time flies?
It really
Where's
does.
the time gone? Mm-hmm. So when you're investing and you're thinking ahead, 5 years seems so far away. Just think back the last 5 years. For many of our listeners, think back the last 10 years. Think back about when you had children and grandchildren, how they've grown. You keep saying it to yourself.
Yeah.
Where's the time gone? So when you're investing, it may seem so far ahead. Just look back.
All right. Our next question, what should one be looking at when you get your retirement fund statement?
Yeah, that I get all the time. Mm-hmm. Please, what must I do? Firstly, every member of a fund is entitled to a membership statement on the first year. So what you need to do is you need to look at your previous statement. What was your value a year ago? Then you need to have a look at how much have I contributed during the last year, and you need to add that to the value you had from the previous year, and now you need to compare that to the current value. And if it's down, that means the fund lost money, and if it's up, the fund performed. You can always ask the trustees, how did the fund perform during the year? You also need to deduct from your contribution. If you think I'm paying 1,000 Rand or 2,000 Rand to a retirement fund, some of that money may have gone, firstly, to life cover. Some of them may have gone to disability, some to even dreaded disease or gap cover. There are some costs that are incurred in the total contribution between you and your employer. So you need to find out what those are so that you add the correct amount contributed to your funds. You also need to understand who are the beneficiaries, because remember, under a retirement fund, even though you may nominate beneficiaries, it doesn't mean that that is the person who's going to receive the money. A retirement fund is obliged to pay it to dependents. So if you appoint, I've got one particular case where the individual has appointed under a retirement fund one child and appointed under a policy another child. The trustees of that retirement fund will look at that benefit and they will not take any notice of the other fund. They'll say this has got to go to dependents in terms of their obligation under Section 37C and the payment. So that's another important thing you need to understand. And if you've added voluntary contributions to your fund, then you need to add that to the figures to have a look at how your fund is done. I can tell you that certainly over the last year, I would expect your retirement fund to be greater than the amount you had the previous year, together with what you contributed.
Okay. Brian, a number of questions have already started coming through. I want us to deal with some of them. This is a message from Anonymous. It says, good morning. I'd like to find out. I'm 49 years old. At the moment, I haven't started paying for retirement. It's just been so difficult. Where and how do I even start? Please help me.
Yeah, by the way, I know you've sent it in anonymously. You didn't have to, because so many people are now sighing a bit of relief that you've asked this question, because they're all in the same situation. I always say you can never ask a stupid question. You know, when I do a lecture and there are 300 people in the room and I finish, and now the master of ceremonies or lady of ceremonies says, please, any questions? And no one wants to put up their hand, and you can feel the tension in the room because you know people want to ask the question, and one person puts up their hand and asks the question. You see the tension in the room. You've seen this yourself. It just dissipates because people now, that question's been asked. So, very simply, a very sad situation because not only have you lost 25 years of contributions, you've lost the growth on those contributions. So, but if you do nothing, you'll have nothing, and if you start to do something, the best place for you to do something is, firstly, if you're paying tax, then look at a retirement annuity because you get a tax deduction. If you're not looking at paying tax, then look at tax-free savings, which comes with after-tax rands. But start doing something now. Engage with your bank, with a financial planner. Let them start to see. The answer's never going to be happy, but it's going to be a lot better than if you do nothing now. The secret is to start earlier, but so many people have not been able to, and I fully understand your question.
I've got, I don't know if Dinky in KZN is asking a serious question or if he's just taking the mickey out of us, Brian. He says, if I have R1 million and I need to invest this, I've got the 4 big banks and my trust bank. Which is the safer option?
Well, you've got the 4 big banks, even 6 of them that I would invest in. You don't need to worry about banks. You could, stick to the top banks. I mean, I'm a believer in that, and go there. And if you've got R1 million, depend. Now, if you've got R1 million, the question I'm going to ask you: are you looking for income? Are you looking for growth? Or are you looking for a combination? If you're looking for income, I've discussed that, where you can go. If you're looking for growth, you want a diversified portfolio, both in equities and property and some bonds. And if that's it, and if you need income and growth, then you need to sit down and say, how much income do you need? And based on the income requirements will determine the strategy that's set out for you. Because as I said, you want certainty and security from on the monthly income. But then depending on your age, Dinky, you didn't give us your age. If you've got more long-term, you're going to be investing in growth assets. You can be invested in unit trust. You can be invested in Satrix or Signia funds, but sit with a financial planner and let them help you and work through what I always call the financial jigsaw puzzle.
Okay. The next one says, good morning, I hope you're fine. I'd like to remain anonymous. I've been an employee for this one company for over 15 years and have been contributing to MIPFA Provident Fund since 2007. I'd like Brian to please assist me or transfer any help from one of his contacts. My fund statements reflect that I'm employed with different companies and shows broken services with my company. This ultimately has affected my funds as I don't believe that the accumulated amount reflects the over 15 years that I've been with this one company for. Please, Cathy, I really need your help to resolve this before the two-pot system kicks in.
Okay, you're a member of the Motor Industries Fund. Can I just ask our producer to take back your phone number? Okay. I'll need to get more details. It's very specific to you. The companies have been taken over. There's been a lot of consolidation. So the fact that one company takes over another has no impact whatsoever on your pension benefits. They get transferred. But we'll take your number down and I'll give you a call in the next few days.
All right. Cathy, hi Cathy, is fixed rate or inflation linked RSA savings bond better?
Yeah, look, the inflation rate is lower because there's a hedge against inflation. I would say the fixed rate is better because inflation is coming down. Our latest figures were 5.2%. That was announced last week. We're hoping inflation comes down. The midpoint of inflation is between 3 and 6%, 4.5%. I would be going to the fixed level. 2 years ago, when inflation was starting to raise its head, then maybe I would certainly myself, if I was putting money in, I won't be, just let me make the point, because I pay tax, and I always said you need to look at the net rate. I don't need income, so I'm not looking for income, I'm looking for long-term growth. But in your particular case, I would, if my mother came to me and said, should I buy which one, inflation-linked or fixed, I'd say fixed.
Here's another one before we go to a break, Brian. Good morning. In 2005, I resigned After working for government for 10 years, I was given an insult. Let me go into it. I was given an insult of 54,000 Rand. Then SARS deducted 6,000 Rand from that. Is it possible for me to go and ask for my pension since I'm now 55 years old? Brian? Oh, apologies.
Sorry about that one.
No problem.
Yeah,
Sorry,
joked a little
Brian.
bit there. Look, you've already received your benefits, so I'm not quite sure when you say, can you go and get your pension because you're 55? You can at 55 receive a pension, but you said you received 54,000 and they deduct 6,000 Rand tax. So let me tell you exactly how that works. The first 25,000 Rand is tax-free, and then the balance is taxed at 18%. So in your particular case, if your benefit was 60,000 Rand, you would have got the first 25,000 Rand tax-free. The balance of 35,000 would have been taxed at 18%, which works out to nearly around about the 6,000. They would have given you 54,000. So I don't know why you think you're entitled to the additional, but I'm going to be giving my number out at the end of the program, and you can give me a call.
So it's likely that 54,000 at the time was this individual's...
His withdrawal benefit of 60,000. I can't comment because I don't know what he was earning, but if this individual calls me and I get a bit more details from him, I'll be able to do some situation. By the way, if your benefit if you leave the fund, resign from the fund, and it's over now, it's over 575,000, you will. Sorry, if you resign from the fund, it's now 27,500. Up to 660 is taxed at 18. Anything above that is taxed at 27%, and anything above that is taxed at 36%. So be very careful if you resign from a company and you take your benefit and you don't preserve it. And then I'd also like to make one other comment. If you preserve it, you have every right to make a withdrawal, either the full amount or part of the amount, before you retire. And if you're going to take any money out, always take the money out before you preserve. So you're working for company ABC, you resign, you can make one withdrawal before transferring to the preservation fund, and once it's in the preservation fund, you can make another withdrawal. But if you transfer the whole lot to the preservation fund and you take one withdrawal, I've got that particular client phoned me yesterday, he took that one withdrawal, you cannot take another withdrawal until retirement. So you have two bites at the cherry.
All right, thanks for that, Brian. I'm back with more of your questions for Brian Hirsch after this.
Get your payments done with the utmost security and convenience when you purchase a TV license now. With our new secure payment systems with a one-time PIN OTP feature and the choice of receiving your OTP via SMS or email, you can ensure prompt and secure payments. The additional use of capture will protect you against spam and automated data attractions. With TV licenses, you can enjoy watching all your favorite shows or movies that matter to you. Get yours today. Visit www.tvlic.co.za.
In the heart of darkness, a beacon of light emerges. A brand new season is coming your way with your 2024 Miss South Africa Top 30. Hosted by our reigning queen, Miss South Africa, we embark on a transformative journey. Join us for the spectacular new season of Crown Chasers.
Crown Chasers is back.
Starts 29 June at 8:30 p.m. only on S3 Open Up.
SAFM Youth Month Takeover. SAFM invites young people between the ages of 18 to 35 to take over the airwaves this Youth Month. All you have to do is send a WhatsApp voice note or text message to 061 410 4107 or email info@safm.co.za. Tell us which show you'd like to co-host and what the two compelling issues facing our 30 years of democracy are, and we could be calling you. Terms and conditions apply.
#SAFM Talking Point.
All right, we continue the conversation on the talking point. Let me bring in some of your questions on the phone lines. I'll kick it off in Cape Town. Mkolisi, good morning.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, Mr. Hirsch.
Good morning, Khaleesi.
Good morning to the listeners of the show. I just wanted to check something. If you have to lump sum money between, let's say, 10 and 20,000, and you want to put it away for growth purposes over the long term, because the short term, as you've explained, I understand it's not going to be a good advice for me to go ahead that way. What would you advise? I go to the bank, or I go to one of these service providers like Sanlam and the like, and say, here I have this, what do you have available for me?
Okay.
And which one of those packages is the best one to choose?
Okay, and Mkolisi, before you go, you said you have between 10 and 25 million to invest.
No. Sorry. Oh, I would love that. Between 10,000 rand and let's say 20 or 50,000 rand.
Oh, 10 and 25. Okay, all right. Okay, got you, Mkolisi.
Okay, Khaleesi, the first question I would ask you is, where does this fit into the rest of your portfolio? What does the rest of your portfolio look like? So I'm going to deal with it in two parts. If you don't have a portfolio and you're looking to invest 10 to 50,000 rand, I would certainly be looking at what's called exchange-traded funds. If you've got a long-term time horizon, anything longer than 5 years, I look at Signia and I look at Satrix. You can Google both of them and have a look. I'd be certainly, if you'd asked me a year ago, I'd be certainly more favourable disposed to going offshore, and particularly with the rand recovering. But I think there's a lot of possible value in our South African market, and I would possibly be going into what I call our the Satrix. That's the other thing, the Satrix Top 40, which is the top 40 companies. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and so whereas I'm still favouring offshore, I still believe that this amount of money now, I think you'll do better, because I think there's good value, and if this government of national unity works out and everyone's happy, not everyone's going to be happy, but if the rest of the world feels that we're making good progress, we could find rating agencies upgrading us again, maybe looking at it slightly differently. I believe we're also making good progress in terms of grey listing, although it probably won't happen as quickly. So I would say be looking at the Satrix fund. Signia's got great offshore funds, but I'd be looking at Satrix. I'd be looking at the Satrix Top 40. You can Google it, SATRIX Top 40.
Okay. Much appreciated. For what term maybe?
Longer than 5 years.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
All right, Mkolisi, all the best, hey?
Okay, bye. Thanks, man.
Yeah, I also picked up 10 to 25 million. That's why I said to you.
I had to double check. I was like,
yeah.
My next question, Mkolisi, was going to be, well, how did you, fall into such fortune? All right, I think he's gone there. To Matlosana now. Pule, good morning.
Hi, Cathy, how are you?
Good, Pule.
Yes, Cathy, I just want to ask a quick question because we don't have time. In case of you have a retirement annuity policy and you are 59 years of age and you cash it, then the ex-company take that money and pay it to SARS, and you don't owe SARS, but SARS give you far less. Let me make a worse scenario. Say you have to get 65,000, then SARS give you 45 and they take 20. What might be the reason?
Puli, I think I'm misinterpreting what you're saying. But if you've got a retirement annuity and you reach retirement, you're entitled to take 1/3 in cash, or if it's under 247,500 with a single fund. That means if you've got 5 funds with Old Mutual, for example, totaling 300,000, you can't make access of that 247,500. But if you've got 2 different retirement annuities with 2 different companies, you can take up to 247,500. And furthermore, if you haven't made use of the 500,000 that you can get tax-free either on retrenchment or from retirement, that would also go to offset any tax. So it's not automatically assumed that you're going to pay tax. At retirement, up to 500, it's now 550,000 rand. you'll get tax free. So when you use the number of 65,000, you won't pay 20,000 rands tax. You'll pay tax on any pension you get, and that is added to income. And again, depending on the size of the pension, will determine the tax. Pule, I'm going to give my number out now, if that's with your permission, Cathy. It's 011-8804-888. Maybe we need to take this one off air, and if it's one that I think is more interesting.
Say it again. Your number is 011
8804-888. Please leave all the messages, who you are, where you're phoning from, and please make sure you've got an answering service so you can identify that I've called you, and leave your message and let me know where you are. And if I can't get hold of you, I'll get one of my colleagues to call you. 011-880-488.
Okay, thank you. Have a lovely day.
All right, Pule. Thanks for that. Pule out in Matlosana. I'm going to squeeze this one in. Brian, can you please advise which is the best vehicle of investment if one's personal private retirement annuity matures before retirement age? My year of maturity was at age 55, but I plan to continue working until 60.
Keep it going. Just keep it going with the same company. Have a look at the funds you're in at age 55. Have a look at what funds are in. You've got a retirement annuity for an insurance company or whoever it may be, but have a look at the underlying funds, and whoever gave you that retirement annuity, contact them and see how those funds should be invested for a further 5 years. But I always say, don't cash in retirement annuities unless you're desperate and you need the cash to pay something off. You continue paying that retirement annuity. Not only are you going to get the contributions for the next 5 years, but you're going to get the growth for the next 5 years. Your retirement annuity will be more than double than what you would get now.
All right. Brian Hirsch, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming through.
Cathy, thanks. Nice to be with you. See you next week.
All right, we'll see Brian again next week, Tuesday. Yes, we'll be dealing with the issue of trusts. It's 11 o'clock. Time for your latest news update.
Thank you very much. The top stories this hour. The EFF lists its GNU demands and Julian Assange freed from a British jail. A very good morning to you. The EFF says it'll occupy its opposition benches and continue to mobilize the Progressive Caucus in Parliament. This comes after 3 of the 6 founding parties left the Progressive Caucus to join the Government of National Unity. These include the PAC, UDM and Al-Jamaa. EFF MP Sam Matiasi has listed the EFF's conditions if it were to join the GNU.
We will join the Government of National Unity provided that its modality must be a coalition government, not a repeat of a failed Government of National Unity of 1994, a sell-out arrangement. 2, on condition that the fascist and racist anti-black organizations, the DA and the Freedom Front Plus, are not part of that arrangement. Those are our minimum demands and conditions we are placing before the ANC.
DA leader Solim Simang says that political parties must consider that none of them obtained majority votes to form a provincial government in Gauteng. On Sunday, Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi postponed an announcement of his provincial cabinet. The ANC obtained about 35% of the provincial votes, while the DA received 27%. Msimanga says negotiations between parties must be for the interest of the citizens and must be conducted in good faith.
We have been at a stage where we were discussing principles, because you cannot discuss the issue of positions if you haven't discussed the issue of principle in terms of how you're going to share power, first of all. Second of all, how do you then deal with the issue of inclusion of other parties into the fray? So how do you then sort of dilute positions going down? And the third thing is that you also now need to then discuss the issue of decision making, because none of us have been given 50%. Therefore, none of us cannot decide unilaterally on what needs to happen.
Northern Cape Premier Zamani Soul will be inaugurated this morning after he was elected over a week ago. The ANC, which failed to secure an outright majority in May's elections, received votes from the PA and the FF+, who helped Seoul to secure his second term as premier. The Border Management Authority says it has put measures in place at all ports of entry due to the increase of Mpox cases. This after the Health Department confirmed 13 cases and 2 deaths in Gauteng and KZN. Spokesperson Cathy Mohlahlana says they are implementing a screening process for travellers entering the country at all ports of entry.
BMA Port Health officers are well trained to be vigilant to observe for any lesions and other symptoms during their operations at the ports. In any incident, should there be a case presented to the BMA that would need further referral to a health facility, arrangements have been made with ambulance services from the Department of Health for referral to healthcare facilities. We also encourage travelers suspecting any symptoms to seek medical care immediately, especially those who have traveled to areas with cases of Mpox.
3 suspects aged between 32 and 46 are expected to appear in court in Durban after they were arrested for copper cable theft to the value of 450,000 rand. The suspects were arrested on Sunday at Isipingo, south of Durban. Police spokesperson Carmen Ryans says the suspects are facing charges of tampering with essential infrastructure and being in possession of suspected stolen property, as well as receiving the stolen property.
Members from the SAPS eThekwini Economic Infrastructure Task Team were patrolling along Benito Road in Isipingo Rail when they noticed a white bakkie with 3 foreign nationals reversing towards the rear of a house. The SAPS members approached tactically and noticed a load of copper cables lying on the corner of the house. Upon inspecting the rear of the bakkie, copper cables were found under tarpaulins. The suspects could not account for being in possession of the cables.
And WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been freed on bail from a British prison after reaching a plea deal that ends his fight against extradition to the US. Assange is accused of exposing sensitive American secrets about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. After more than 5 years in a UK prison, Assange is on his way home to Australia. In a recorded message, his wife, Stella Assange, thanked supporters.
Throughout the years of Julian's imprisonment and persecution, an incredible movement has been formed, a movement of people from all walks of life, from around the world, who support not just Julian and not just us and our family, but what Julian stands for, truth and justice. We still need your help. What starts now with Julian's freedom is a new chapter.
The top story at 11 o'clock, the EFF says it'll occupy its opposition benches and continue to mobilize the Progressive Caucus in Parliament. For SAFM News, Kemudupi Makhalemele.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide. Leading the conversation. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays 9 a.m. till midday.
Bossez beaucoup, mangez beaucoup. Oh Africa, c'est ça son fort. Mangez beaucoup, dansez beaucoup. Oh Africa, Amérique ou la banajanya visa te sorona. Bakewala ye wala Mandela le fait. Johannesburg, le Ghana, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Éthiopie, oh quel beau pays. Wa Africa, wa yeah, yeah. Wa Africa, wa yeah, oh, oh, oh. Ya cheke, ya dole, ya futu, ya fufu, ya loco, oh quel bon manger. Ya duche, ya yassa, ya mafé et fakol, ya coco, oh quel bon manger. Konjigi basigile kabana magalani bema koromanko.
Oh, Africa, Africa, the continent of our dreams. What a great way to start off this final hour of this show. And we're going to be taking a look at elections on the African continent and in particular the unseating of liberation movements. Of course, as South Africa, we are sort of still deep in our transition phase where our own liberation party in this country, the ANC, that has really been able to govern this country for the last 30 years, is now effectively out of power in the sense that they no longer enjoy the majority vote in South Africa. In the rest of the SADC region, we have the likes of Namibia and Mozambique, where both SWAPO and Frelimo, respectively, have been in power since their countries attained independence. And we're going to see elections for those countries too. So what is it that keeps liberation parties in power? Advocate Sipho Mantula is a researcher with the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. Advocate Mantula, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Refreshing morning and Jambo Africa, Sis Cathy, even to your listeners.
Jambo, as Elvis would say in the morning. So, Advocate Mantula, winds of change sweeping across the continent, and by and large, when we look at even the state that South Africa finds itself in today, many have predicted that the ANC would end up here because it follows on the trajectory of what has happened with so many other liberation movements in the country. But let's just talk about what we have seen elsewhere on the continent.
Thank you, Sis Katie. Others are saying it is actually not the sweeping of the wind, Sis Katie. They call it the slow death of liberation movements, and also the power sharing that is coming into play. When you look also in the continent, you have spoken about SWAPO, you spoke about Frelimo in Mozambique, but we saw even in Zimbabwe, we have seen in other countries like Zambia, where in Zambia also there is a new opposition that is running government. We saw Malawi also, Lazarus Chakwera taking over there. So what we are seeing is that the liberation movements are losing what I call connection. They are no longer related to their electorates or to the masses. And that is because of this entitlement that they are having, that they are the only liberators. And secondly, it is for the issue for them not to understand the dynamics of the young population that is also not interested into politics, but also being worried about corruption, that we see corruption in many of these liberation movements. Hence, I was connecting it with the first link of entitlement. And maybe thirdly, we can say the issue of not managing the state power. Because when liberation movements came into state power, others are saying they were coming from the bush to the office. But now coming from the bush to the office, it means that you need to understand the craft of the state, from policy making, accountability, economy. So most of them, what they've done, is that they've went into a what I would call a random looting in most of their countries. They have lost confidence in their own communities. They have employed their families and friends into office. So that's how they are losing power. And in Namibia, we saw after the Pohamba, when he left, the current acting president also has to give power to a first woman in the SADC region who will be the first president in the SADC region. Frelimo and Renamo, we know their tension. And at some point, we know that in Frelimo, Philip Nyusi will not be coming back. There's a new, David Chapo is the new presidential candidate. And it's like he's not clued up. He's not connected with the people of Mozambique. Hence, we have this fear that most of these liberation movements are dwindling their local support. They might be having regional and international recognition, but if nationally and within your own country, you are losing confidence, you are losing trust from the electorate, that raises a lot in terms of those liberation movements. Also, Sis Cathy, you'll remember with the ANC, there was a time when the ANC said, we are no longer a liberation movement, we are a political party. And they go back again, they say, no, we are no longer a political party, we are a liberation movement. So you find that they are using semantics, these liberation movements. They become political and governing parties. When it is convenient for them, they become liberation movements. And that's where, when I look at the gist of the continent, is the issue of the new players, new political parties emerging also, that also threatens the survival of these liberation movements.
Of course, many of these movements that we're talking about would have been those that took over power from the colonial entities or the colonial powers. A lot has changed on the continent since, in terms of democracy and then a need to sort of bring in more democratic systems of governance. What impact has this had on these liberation movements and how they see themselves and the value that they're bringing in their various and respective societies?
You know, Sis Cathy, yes, that is correct, that most of the liberation movements were formed to fight against colonialism, apartheid. The value that they will bring, they will always use this notion of people's power. We are bringing the people's freedom. We are bringing the people's interest of occupying the land, people having access to basic needs. We are bringing human rights to our citizens. And post that, they will tend to forget, and they will go into a deep sleep of starting to steal the elections, some of them, stealing the public funds, also losing confidence in terms of accountability. So some of the liberation movements in the African continent, there is this notion that I said earlier, beyond entitlement is legitimacy. They will use the word that we were the ones who went to exile. We are the ones who have liberated you. So we are entitled, and we are the ones who have legitimacy. But now, like hence I said earlier, it is important when there is a transition, they need to understand that the dynamics and the needs of the citizens are changing almost every year or almost every electoral cycle. And hence now, what they have done so far with their former colonial masters is that others are trying to also make peace with their own colonial masters. We know Zimbabwe, after Mnangagwa, they were facing sanctions. He wanted to go back to the Commonwealth. We see Zambia, Chilima is trying by all means to get the EU and the British government to support him. Namibia, we saw how it's trying to talk to Germany to say, how does Germany pay reparation of the genocide that happened in 1904 to 1908? So you'll find that most of them, they're also trying to even reconnect with their former colonial masters, and which is too late because some of the colonial masters have not dealt with the question of reparation. They have not dealt with the question of a clear governance that is African-driven. They have actually imported the Westminster system to many of our African countries. They have brought what others, they call it a Washington, meetings, consensus of democracy. So we are not still having even our own democratic practices in Africa. So some of the colonial powers, when they came in, they didn't change anything as the liberation movements. They went on the colonial master script, not changing democratic ways of governing. As some of the elders like Mzwakeli Mbede once spoke about African democracy, that when you talk of African democracy, it is different from the European democracy. So the colonial masters with the liberation movements, what they did, they colluded, as we are having coalition governments now, they have colluded to work around this notion of co-governance and giving only political power and not economic power. So that's why some of them were struggling also with how do they regain economic growth in their countries when they are still going to IMF and World Bank to borrow money. Most of them, they have also lost confidence into their heritage and their cultural identity. Hence, like I said, we find even most of our parliaments in Africa, they've got a European context. They have a European setup. The way things happening in parliament, the way the president is being sworn in, it is not also African. You find that there is a lot that it was supposed to have been decolonized, as Ngugi once talked about, the decolonization of the mind. So I think liberation movements also post-1990, post-1970, we can say post-1960, 70, 80, and 90. Most of them, they've not underwent what I would call the decolonization of mind, which will include governance, which will include its social relations with its citizens. So we are having that dilemma of most of the liberation movements still paying their allegiance to their former colonial masters.
When we look at, again, the formation of these movements and what they have been able to accomplish, at the peak of their time in existence, has been a reshaping of societies, but planting the idea of what is possible. And that largely done through a great deal of intellectual contributions from some of these figures who, in their own rights were really formidable, whether we're talking about the likes of your Patrice Lumumbas, your Thomas Sankaras, your Samora Machels. They brought in a lot of that credibility in terms of intellectual thought, scholarship. Would you say that we still have many of, the same caliber today? And does that also have an impact on the lack of ability of these organizations to sustain themselves? Because those that would have been at the helm driving this intellectual thought, driving the vision of what the continent can be, those have passed away. They're no longer around.
No, absolutely. Sis Cathy, what I was thinking as we're talking about this intellectual contribution of these political figures or political liberators is that, yes, there was that time when there was an intellectual contribution that they have served. I mean, they have now. What you are lacking is that many liberation movements have political schools now lately. So you will assume that in their political school they will have integrated that knowledge of those who have came before them. But what we see now, we don't see intellectual political theories that talks to the ordinary people. We find that when political parties go to their national policy conferences, it's all about position. It is all about factions. It is all about insulting one another. So we have lacked that knowledge that you said. When I think of Mozambique today, I think of Eduardo Mondlane, who was also one of our students at Wits here. When you think of people like Samora Machel, as you have said, Abonu Joma, those are the people who also learn from the SADC region. But the current crop of leaders, I think there's a depth of lack of knowledge or ignorance. And hence I said, even the issue of the political schools that this liberation movement ought to have strengthened. And also the syllabus. One will have assumed that even the liberation movement, they should have focused on the Pan-African syllabus in many of their education systems so that we don't lose focus in terms of understanding the political theories. But now we do find leaders who are also not attached to the Pan-African project. You find many liberation movements have forgotten the role of the frontline states, which is called SADC now. They've forgotten the role of the then OAU, which is AU. But what is the role of AU in the cultural liberation struggles, in the cultural education space? So for me, it is that there is that lack of knowledge, but you can say that it is self-induced. One will not blame them. One will say it is a matter of these political leaders of today have this sense of want to study, they will want to relearn, understand the new methods. Some of them, they'll tell you about the Marxists, they'll tell you about Karl Marx, they'll tell you about the Cuban Revolution, the Russian Revolution, but you always ask, do we understand the African Revolution of Nkrumah and Selassie and people like Sankara and Lumumba, that how can we connect it to the 21st century? Because yes, it's good to talk about these African griots and leaders, but we have to relate them to the 21st century and even to the young generation of today so that they can see them to be easily relatable. Because once we talk about that generation of Solomon Tekiso Wakaplaki, generation of Oliver Tambo, Lembede, A.P. Mda, for the young people of today in the liberation movements, Cathy, it is neither here nor there. They are far-fetched from understanding the liberation ethos and the liberation theories of those great leaders. But we do hope, as they are on the social media, they do read some of their texts, some of their books, so that they can able to learn who were those leaders who were very passionate about their country, about their continent, rather than to look at the public funds and to look at their egos and their fame.
When you scan the continent, are there any outliers when it comes to these movements that perhaps are on a different trajectory rather than that of decline, or even of kleptocracy, where, they are hanging on to power? They may well still be in government because of their reluctance or, their refusal to give that power up, and are therefore running what could also be seen as autocratic states?
Actually, when we do a scan for the continent scan, both from North, West, and East Africa, we see that slow death and we see new emerging political parties. We look at East Africa, we might say maybe Kagame is coming back again since 1996. But we saw also, when you look at North Africa, that there is still the issue of Arabization of politics in that part. When you look at West Africa also, you see the new emergence of military leaders in West Africa. It means that we are moving away from democracy that is brought, as you said, beyond kleptocracy. Is that democracy, like I said earlier, is also brought by money. Those who have money, they think they've got a democratic voice than those who don't have money. When you come to the islands also, when you go to Madagascar, Comoros, Seychelles, also you see also that there is that sense of a change in terms of people trying to to have new alternatives to this liberation movement. Hence, I said to you, the whole continent, it is in that slow death of liberation movements and the emergence of new alternative political parties. But most of them, they are breakaways, by the way. So any political party that is formed to be an opposition to the current ruling parties or liberation movement, they were once part of that liberation movement. So you see breakaways in most of these movements that are now starting to challenge the current liberation movement. Hence, you see that you cannot say there is a good practice so far that you have a liberation movement that they say that they are very comfortable, they're always getting their votes, they're always having confidence and trust from the electorate. The tables have turned. I think the 21st century have taught many liberation movements that they need to reconnect with the electorates. They need to reconnect with the African realities to say that government, it is not all about getting into the parliament, but it also accountability is also to be open to the electorate and to the masses. So I think that's where I will say to you, we don't have a good practice per se to say that liberation movements who are still will say that they are very comfortable. There are new emerging dynamics that are coming in many regions in the continent. Hence I said from North Africa to West Africa as well to East Africa.
All right. We're in conversation with Advocate Sipho Mantula. So many of you already on the lines. I'll take your calls on the other side of the 11:30 news headlines.
A very good morning to you with the news headlines. Ake Mudupi Makhalemele. The presidency says the government continues to perform its constitutional functions without a cabinet. The EFF says it'll occupy its opposition benches and continue to mobilize the Progressive Caucus in Parliament. And thousands of people are expected to join protests across Kenya today opposing a government finance bill that proposes tax rises. I'll be back with a full news update at midday.
SAFM. Prime time all day long.
Lights, camera, scalpel. Every second counts, and every cut, every thought, every action is critical. Critical. Mondays to Wednesdays at 9 p.m. on S3. Starts 11 June. Channel your best drama with BBC Primetime, only on S3. Open up.
Are you ready to take your brand to a whole new level? Have you ever thought about how big companies use strong PR to get more people to know about their brands? The Allure Group presents the inaugural Building a Brand Through PR Masterclass. Join us on Wednesday, July 3rd from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the DP World Wonders Stadium in Johannesburg. Learn from 12 industry experts as they share their case studies and personal testimonies that will transform your approach to brand building. Visit www.prmasterclass.co.za to get your tickets. Only 650 rands for an in-person experience, or join us virtually for just 350 rands. Don't miss this chance to master the art of PR and take your brand to the next level. Building a brand through PR Masterclass, powered by independent media.
Santi Africa! The great Olympians are heading to Paris with courage, determination, and eagerness to raise the flag of Africa Zonga very high. Let's rally behind the well-decorated Team SA. Athletics, swimming, canoeing, climbing, gymnastics, and surfing. The winning mentality of Africa Chibembe will prevail. Hashtag the global battle of great athletes. Experience the Olympic Games Paris 2024 from Friday 26 July until Sunday 11 August. Live on SABC TV channels and SABC radio stations. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. SABC Sport, proud broadcaster of the Olympic Games Paris 2024. For the love of the game.
SAFM Youth Month Takeover. SAFM invites young people between the ages of 18 to 35 to take over the airwaves this Youth Month. All you have to do is send a WhatsApp voice note or text message to 061 410 4107 or email info@safm.co.za. Tell us which show you'd like to co-host and what the two compelling issues facing our 30 years of democracy are, and we could be calling you. Terms and conditions apply.
#SAFM Talking Point.
All right, we continue the conversation on the talking point. We've been reflecting on the rise and fall of liberation movements on the continent. Advocate Sipho Mantula is a researcher with the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. Yeah, so many of you wanting to contribute to this conversation, so I'll go straight to the lines then. Let me kick it off. The majority of our callers all coming from the Eastern Cape. Let me kick it off with Churchill in Mthatha. Good morning, Churchill.
Good morning, Cathy. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Does the Eastern Cape have a particular interest on liberation movements?
I don't know. Maybe it's a coincidence.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, Churchill.
Yeah, look, Cathy, the topic that you're raising, it's what I've always said to my friends locally, when we're looking at what is happening in our politics. I've always said, look, we can't fault or we can't blame the ANC. Let's go and look at the history of liberation movements. The liberation movements have a history of coming and going. When the ANC took over, and it has happened even in other parts of the world, everybody was excited to say, look, yeah, we've arrived. This is what we've been waiting for. But unfortunately, when they get to government, and I've said this to my friends, they don't transform fully to become partisan government. Remember, their modus operandi has always been that of collapsing the apartheid state. And that's what has been happening with the ANC. When you look at some of its members, they don't realize now we are the ones that are parties in government. You look at most of them, like, for instance, when you look at issues like corruption, greed, self-enrichment, and so on, resulting into them losing touch with ordinary people. Yes, they might have good policies on paper, but unfortunately unable to implement them fully because of the things that I've just mentioned.
But Churchill,
this is exactly, yes.
How is this a common script across the board? How is it that they all fall into the same pattern?
Look, I think it's this entitlement, because most of the time, some of them, they want to catch up to say, look, we liberated you. They feel that they're entitled to loot from the coffers of the state. We've liberated you, so there's some time that we have lost when we're out in the bush, or I'm trying to say. So we need to catch up. So most of the leaders, I'll make an example. Look at let's make an example of the leaders like the former President Zuma. Even today, you ask him a question, he would answer you and say, what is it that I've done? He doesn't say anything, absolutely anything that he has done. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? And look at the number of the ANC members that are implicated in the Zondo Commission that are fingered there. It's most of them. Now, what happens is you'll find that now there are these splinter parties that come in because nobody wants to be prosecuted. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? It goes on and on and on, because if you're saying now you're prosecuting them, you're rather killing the ANC. This is how they die now.
Okay.
Hence, I've always said to some of my friends, let's not blame the ANC. The time has come.
Okay.
Just like any other liberation movements, they come and go.
Churchill, let's leave it there on that note. Olani, also from the Eastern Cape, good morning.
Hi, Cathy. I must just say happy Mother's hello to Mkaiwa, Churchill in Mthatha. I think, Cathy, we need to look, there is an elephant in the room on this topic, from your guest, the advocate, that he hasn't mentioned on it's the public, that you and I, including him and every other one who is doing the voting. The issue, the lack of knowledge on what is supposed to take place, and the ignorance by those who know, who choose to ignore what they know in terms of either exposing it and availing themselves to do the right thing, are the key determinants where it allows those who are already in power. Remember, those who are in power either took advantage of the ignorance or lack thereof of knowledge of the voters and emotionally canvassed using the semantics of the past instead of focusing on the current and moving forward. I'll give you an example, Cathy. The issue of industrialization, and to be more specific, because when people talk about industrialization, they only focus more on the mines, and we forget there's agribusiness as well that can be industrialized in that space. You hear the word, but there is no activity around that. And I think it's us as voters who needs to educate ourselves and understand the people or institutions or that is in terms of the political parties that one chooses. Are you choosing it based on their emotions, or are you choosing because there is something that we are expecting to change for our communities?
Okay. Thanks for that contribution. We're going to stay in the Eastern Cape, this time again from Mthatha. Pasika, good morning.
Hey, Cathy, I think it's high time you sponsor and you allow us as the Eastern Capers to represent us in the government of national unity. I think we deserve a slice of the cake. Ras Mantula habari azu, so he is son of Africa. Cathy, I've been reading two papers. The first one is by Professor Cathy Mohlahlana, an Africanist retired economist in KwaZulu. He pondered to inquire 10 years ago as to whether in our country we have reached an era of what she calls a 20-year test of liberation movement, who after 20 years they cease to exist, they get into power as Ras Mantula has clearly chronicled. But Cathy, there is an interesting aspect which Prof. Mohlahlana addresses, wherein he says our misery is not natural, it is artificial. And the source of the whole thing is the Berlin Conference of 1844 to 1855. It's a topic for another day. But now I want to zoom in into what has also been sponsored by a public commentator and a poet, Vusumuzi Moyo, wherein he says here, Cathy, Africa, that is mostly African leaders, they are not scared, they do not fear, they do not lack embarrassment and shame. Monty Makanya would say, when the erstwhile President Zuma went to Russia, the first thing they did, they gave him a newspaper in the front page. It was reported that a minister was executed publicly, and he asked, why did he have to execute him publicly? And they said, no, he used his office to do what? To enrich his family.
Sure.
Which is why the Japanese would say, fall on your sweat. Something which African leaders, they do not possess. In summation, Cathy, it's a lack of an intellectual discourse, it's a lack of a sense of peace and a lack of shame and embarrassment. Asante sana, Cathy.
All right, Pasika, thanks for that contribution. KD, in the Northern Cape, let's break away from the Eastern Cape a little bit, even though you're along the border. Good morning.
Good morning, KK.
Yeah.
I think the first thing that we have to do is to look at what the liberation movement composed of, the real depth and their function. And it's clear that by that definition, the liberation movements do not define themselves for governance. They do not define themselves for improvement or even revolutionizing the situation of black people. They always carry the character of the colonial power, whether it is Britain, whether it is Congo, Belgium, whether it is French. So this is their limit. And that is why they are not able to do what they are called for, liberation. They don't do that because whatever that the instruments that they have and they think they can use are defined by Europe, are defined by Britain. So now the question that we have to ask is, why is it that Africans don't have the capacity to define themselves beyond what colonialism meant them to be? And that is what we have been dealing with, whether it's the ANC or what. And the most important issue, Cathy, to really point it out to you is that no one is above their spirituality. No one is above what they think defines them. And in reality, these movements were formed by missionaries who taught black people. They taught them history, they taught them politics, and these movements were formed by that, and they remained in that. That is why they could not do more.
Okay. KD in the Northern Cape. Yeah, quite a mouthful, Advocate Mandula, from our listeners. Very different perspectives, but I think clearly a topic that many South Africans also are concerned about, given the amount of time people seem to have applied to this topic even before today.
No, correct, this is Katie, and I think we are sharing the same sentiments, despite that I really, the one of Paseka of quoting Prof. Chabalala was very potent and relevant. Maybe, Katie, as you remember, we spoke offline about this. Maybe the national dialogue that is being mooted in this country, we need to start to look at that issue of being partisan, political allegiance of governing parties, that are they only looking at their liberation struggle history only and not link it with the current realities that many African countries are facing. And maybe secondly, what will be needed is to move away from the issue of cadre employment. It's not only being deployed them, they also employ each other in those positions to say that are they capable also to deal with the national question that many African countries are going through. Yes, it is always important for them to have this what I called a claim that they were the ones who took into the streets, they went to exile for that. But they need to remember, as they were exiled, there were those who were inside. There were those who were behind home fighting also. So you need to also harmonize those who went exiled and those who remained behind, who were holding this fort, who were holding this light of liberation. And maybe to revisit this concept of elections. Are elections only the remedy to governance in Africa? Or beyond elections, what about governance? What about the rule of law? As we are speaking here in New York, we have electoral disputes that are now before the courts of these elections. And that shows also that liberation movements are also believing in this theory of electoral model of Europe, where we are starting to have also the ICT infiltrating our electoral democracy. The way it happened in Kenya, if you can remember, in Kenya there was a problem with the ICT during those elections in 2017. We are picking it up once more in this country, that there are serious allegations around ICT, but we'll wait and see for the courts how to deal with those electoral issues. But I think finally, I will say the callers are correct that we need to understand the current dynamics that are facing electorates. The issue of civic and voter education are also important. So I think those are the issues that I think, as the callers contributed, the liberation movements are still relevant. We should never say that they are not relevant. They are still relevant, but it's for them to reposition, is to reaffirm their objectives to the current realities.
Advocate Mandula, we're going to have to leave it there. He's with the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Relations. That's where we leave it on the talking point for today.
The book reading. Please note that the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAFM presents another episode of The Door, an addict's journey, read by Simpson Kumalo.
I was hoping she'd come talk to me again. I certainly was not going to ask, but I definitely was hoping for her. She did come back and we talked for a while. Then we got into talking about the drug and she asked if I wanted some more. Of course I said yes, and she said she'd organize some. I gave her 300 Rand and she asked me to book a private dance for 3 songs. That would cost me 150 Rand, but that way we'd be left alone for at least 20 minutes. In the private room, she loaded for a rock for me and instructed me like a pro how to do it. I wanted to get the maximum high and did it according to her instructions. I inhaled really slowly, keeping the smoke within until it disappeared into my brain. What followed was an unbelievable ecstatic feeling that staggers the imagination. I was on another level, on another cloud. Before I even sat down, she loaded a rock for herself and then went straight for my zip. She pulled down my pants, slipped on a condom, and set me further up towards heaven. What was this? I was on cloud 9. Who had been keeping away this thing from me? The high disappeared as quickly as it came, and I wanted more. She lit the pipe again and held it for me, whispering that I must hold the smoke in, breathe slowly. I was like a kid, mesmerized. She was a pro. The feeling was instantaneous to my brain, and I was hot again. After she inhaled, she went back below my waist. This thing was doing wonders to me, and I was liking every moment of it. As suddenly as the high came, it went again, and my sanity came back momentarily. I said I wanted to stop, but saying stop and actually stopping are two different things. We did one more hit. Then I went back to my seat and sat there alone, savoring the feeling. I had escaped reality. For a moment, I was completely in another world. This world was to be the bane of my existence. The guilt feelings were overwhelming. I was going through all sorts of emotions. She came and sat with me until I left. I got to know her a bit. She was young and beautiful and never thought she could do what she was doing. She was putting herself through school, and this was a job that gave her the most money the next day. I asked how long she had been doing drugs, and she said not long and expected to quit soon, but that the money was good and she needed more. What I really wanted was to be in a discreet place, away from prying eyes, so I could see what magic this was. Before I left the club that night, I asked her for her number and asked if she was allowed to join me in a hotel. My interest was really the drug. She willingly agreed, and the next day she called, and it was on. We agreed on the weekend. I would book for Saturday. We would meet at around 10 a.m. and check out in the evening so I could be home in time. I couldn't wait for the weekend to arrive and didn't want to contaminate myself with other drugs during the week. I wanted to make sure that I was properly prepared for the occasion. I was on my best behavior at home, arriving on time without issues. The weekend was just too slow for my liking. We talked on the phone during the course of the week, and she reassured me that she was game. It somehow escaped me that she would be coming from the club and straight to me. I actually did not think about that. She must have been tired, but I suppose one thing drugs do to you is that you never fall asleep. That weekend I found a perfect spot, the Holiday Inn by Mill Park, and I went ahead and booked it and checked in and called her and gave her my room number. I didn't have anything on me, but she assured me she'd bring everything, telling me the price for half a moon would be 600 rand. She told me she would be coming with a dealer. Hardly 30 minutes later, there was a knock on my door, and after a quick peep through the little hole, I saw her and a man. I opened the door and smiled. She smiled back, and I let them both in. She introduced me to the Nigerian. His name was Sipho. What the hell? I'd never heard of a Nigerian called Sipho. Well, that was none of my business. I was not Home Affairs. I wasn't going to stand there and ask him about his nationality. On the contrary, I wanted him out of there. After he left, she pulled out from a bag the reason for our gathering. It was the first time I'd seen half a moon of rocks. It was solid and looked like chocolate. I did a quick examination of this thing. She said, "It's the real deal, baby." I didn't have any reason to doubt her. She wanted some biltong and yogurt, which I found strange. Besides, it was in the morning, and I wasn't keen on biltong.